Hi, everybody. Welcome back to part two, Stefanie Drysdale's interview with Mr. Marc Crudgington, Cyber4 Systems LLC, in his new book, The Coming Cyber War. Ms. Stefanie, take it away.
Thank you, Chuck. So, Marc, part two, I'm loving the idea of a sequel to this and a part two. Talk to me about a little bit about what you see coming, both, for part two for your book, as well as things that you're seeing and hearing in the industry right now. What is next? Every day is a new, fun, exciting day in the cyber world. And when I say fun, I don't always mean fun. What's coming next?
Well, in terms of the book, I think if you go back to, like, my book came out in October of 2020, last year. And shortly after that, we had some incidents, mainly SolarWinds. And then this year, and that was around Christmas time. And then this year, we've had some big attacks, Colonial Pipeline. And there's been just a lot of attacks against our infrastructure, and that continues. So I thought, like, that would be really good story to tell, and how all that's come about, and really what we are doing as a nation and other nations are doing to kind of combat. It seems like we've really gone on the offensive this year. But you continue to hear, like, it seems like, every cyber incident is a wake-up call. And it's like, those of us that are in cybersecurity are like, well, after 10 incidents, you would think we'd wake up. And perhaps the Colonial Pipeline was the incident that woke us up, because we went after DarkSide and shut them down. And it was kind of an all hands on deck moment. And the problem has kind of gotten out of hand, and it's been out of hand for a while. And I even write in my book, I think what will be the trigger point to more or less a war is when people start dying over cyber incidents. And unfortunately, I think we will have that happen. And it's already, and I talk about it again in my book, it's already kind of contributed to some deaths, where there was a ransomware attack in a hospital in Germany. And a woman was on her way to the emergency room, and they couldn't check her in because they had been hit by ransomware. Well, they had to move her to another hospital, and that contributed to her death. But I just think that, there's a lot boiling over. And I mentioned earlier in our part one that, it's like the ocean's current, and you don't really feel the cyber impact until you're in it. Well, I think we're all in it now. And I think we have woken up to the seriousness of this, and that cybersecurity is not a cost center; it's a business enabler. And the more mature you have your cybersecurity program commensurate to the risk, the better off your business will be, and be able to move at the speed of digital transformation and propel the business, whatever industry that you're in, ahead of your competitors, or to stay even with your competitors, and provide your customers what they need and want from your company. So it's now gotten the attention of the board. You start seeing a lot more cybersecurity and technology professionals being appointed to boards. But the whole aspect about America's infrastructure, there's 16 critical infrastructures that we've defined in the U.S., and that covers just about every industry. So I think it would be a good sequel to this book to talk about that, and again, what we should do about that.
So in that vein, what do you see and hear right now from companies that you're talking to that you think are actually contributing to the breaches? I mean, we know everybody's trying, nobody's intentionally just trying to, leave things open, but what do you see that's contributing?
Sure. And that goes back to why I started Cyber4 Systems. I was in a CISO role for 15 years, and then really going back to my time in the Air Force, I've been in cybersecurity or security in some aspect. for the last 30 years. And I've seen how the industry has changed, not only just from how we perceive cybersecurity, but, you know, the companies out there just don't seem to have caught up to the risk. So now more than ever, like I mentioned before, I believe cybersecurity is a pillar to a company's success. It's a business enabler. And in relation to risk, you know, the board should be, it should be a part of every board's discussion points. But there's a lot of complexity out there, and there's complexity with the technology, complexity with risks that companies face, complexity with cybersecurity, an awful lot of noise that companies see, and then you add in the regulatory burden, and it's just overhead that companies are facing. And so what I see, particularly, like, you ask 100 CISOs, and none of them are going to say, nah, I don't need any more budget, or I don't need any more people. You know, right now, cybersecurity and companies face three major problems. We have a lack of talent. We have too many alerts that are false alerts, and then like too many panes of glass. So that is complexity, and that lack of talent, you know, contributes to that, and resources as well. But what I typically see is, especially from some of the mid-size, you know, smaller mid-size and small enterprise, is that there is so much noise out there and so much complexity. You know, you can give someone a manual and they're like, well, great. And you'd be surprised, Stefanie, that some of these, and you may know full well that some of these companies don't have a CISO, or they don't have security. They could have someone in IT that's, you know, taking care of security, but you would give them a playbook or something, and they would not know where to begin. And it's not because they don't care or anything like that. It's just they have so many operational duties, just keeping the lights on and keeping up with, you know, all the initiatives that are going on in business right now, that security seems to come secondary. So it goes back to the basics. And we were having this conversation yesterday at a conference I was at up in Dallas, that, you know, it's all about identifying your assets and then protecting those assets. But many companies right now have trouble, and I mean the overwhelming majority have trouble just identifying all of their assets they need to protect in their company. So I think the basics, you'd be surprised in this day and age, but people still struggle with the basics of cybersecurity. And we got into discussions about frameworks, and then you throw in certain frameworks and they have their 300 controls, and it's like, well, which one is important, which one is not? They're all there, they're not weighted, any of that. And I mean, it is just hard for people to figure out. And so I'm really trying to help solve that complexity. But, you know, ransomware, I mean, in reality, nobody should have to pay for ransomware. And just recently, the NIST came out with guidelines that they suggest not paying ransomware. But when you're a company facing downtime and you can't get back up, and you don't have the proper backups, you're left with no other choice. And my point there is, no company should be left with no choice. There are simple solutions out there to solve that problem. And it's basics. It is basics. You know, and it runs the gamut from user awareness to your backup systems and how you take snapshots of your systems, MFA, multi-factor authentication. So these are not too complex things that have been around for years, but people struggle with them. And I see that, you know, day in and day out. And not too many companies could survive a nation state attack. If they come after you and they stay after you, sooner or later they're going to find a way in. But it's your response to that and how noisy you can make it for them, so you do know they're in, and then can start responding. And I have this term called the breach to breach response gap. And I may have talked to you about this before, but it's the time your company is breached to the time that you start responding. A lot of times you hear it as dwell time. the narrower that gap can be, the better off a company is. And unfortunately now, whatever statistic you see, it's over 100 days before companies start responding. And that's just too late. By then your data has been exfiltrated and, you know, you're left in a tough spot.
It's unfortunate. Well, Marc, I so loved having you. I could go on and on with you all day. I say that every time, but I truly mean that. There's so much we could talk about. But definitely, everyone, make sure to check out this book. Marc was nice enough to send me a copy, but y'all have to buy it because it's just good enough that you just have to have it. It's super thorough and goes into so many different parts of what we do. So, Marc, thank you so much for taking time for me and for coming on and sharing all this with us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And, you know, I love what you do and getting the word out on a weekly basis. I just think it's great. So
thank you so much.